In the glitzy and often ruthless world of Hollywood, some stories shine brighter than the rest, while others cast shadows that linger for decades. For a long time, the story of Sondra Locke and Clint Eastwood was one of Hollywood's most legendary romances. They were a true power couple, a director and his muse whose on-screen chemistry was electric and whose off-screen partnership was the stuff of industry gossip. For 13 years they seemed inseparable, making a string of films together and living a life of unbelievable glamour. But behind the doors of their Bel Air mansion, a very different story was playing out. A story of control, quiet manipulation, and a darkness that would eventually tear them apart. Long after the cameras turned away, Sondra Locke came forward with what she called her final, harrowing confession. In her memoir, The Good, the Bad, and the Very Ugly, she didn't just pull back the curtain on her life with Eastwood. She ripped it down. She exposed the massive reality of their relationship, describing a suffocating pattern of control that she said dictated not only her career, but the choices she could make about her own body. It was a story of alleged career sabotage, 2 abortions she claimed he pressured her into, and a sterilization procedure that ended her dreams of motherhood forever. This isn't just another celebrity breakup story. It's a story about power, being silenced, and the devastating price one woman paid for loving one of Hollywood's biggest stars. This is the story of the woman who dared to speak out and the shocking truth she revealed. In her own words, she described him as massive. But Sondra Locke wasn't talking about his movie star status. In her tell-all memoir, she exposed what she called the massive dark reality of her 13-year romance with Clint Eastwood. It was a shocking pattern of control that she claimed got her career sabotaged and her dreams of motherhood destroyed. This is the story of the woman who dared to speak out. Like a lot of Hollywood stories, this one started out as a fairy tale. For Sondra Locke, it all began in 1972 with a casting call. She was already an accomplished actress, with an Academy Award nomination for her very first role in The Heart is a Lonely Hunter. That film had launched her from a small town in Tennessee into Hollywood's orbit. She had a unique, almost ethereal, beauty, and she fiercely guarded the secret of her true age throughout her career. It was that quality that got her an audition for Breezy, a film being directed by the one and only Clint Eastwood. She didn't get the part, but a seed had been planted. 3 years later, in 1975, their paths crossed again for the Western, the outlaw Josie Wales. Locke was auditioning for the role of Laura Lee, the love interest to Eastwood's character. Almost immediately, the professional meeting became personal. The attraction was instant and magnetic. According to Locke, their affair began on their very first date. She later wrote that Eastwood told her he had never been in love before. At the time, he was married to Maggie Johnson, the mother of 2 of his children, but it was reportedly an open marriage. Locke was also married to her childhood friend, Gordon Anderson, who was openly gay. Theirs was a platonic partnership, a deep friendship she maintained for the rest of her life. In this very unique, very Hollywood arrangement, the romance between Clint and Sondra blossomed. He was completely captivated by her. She wrote in her memoir that he even sang, "She made me monogamous" to her. On the set of The Outlaw Josie Wales, their chemistry was obvious, creating a dynamic that was both tender and tense. For Locke, it felt like a dream come true. She was starring opposite one of the biggest movie stars on the planet, a man who now seemed devoted to her. The early years were a whirlwind. Eastwood bought her a beautiful home in the hills, and even purchased a house for her husband, Gordon. At the time, it seemed like a way to solidify their unconventional family, but looking back, you could see it as an early sign of Eastwood's need to manage every part of her life. They made 6 films together, becoming one of the most recognizable screen pairings of the late 70s and early 80s in movies like The Gauntlet and Every Which Way But Loose. Locke was no longer just an actress. She was Clint Eastwood's leading lady, both on and off the screen. From the outside, it looked like a perfect fantasy. She had found her Prince Charming, a powerful man who loved her and seemed dedicated to her career. But as she'd later reveal, the fairy tale was already starting to curdle. The dream was slowly becoming a gilded cage. For a while, that gilded cage must have felt like paradise. Sondra Locke's career was tied to Clint Eastwood's, and that meant stability and a whole lot of visibility. She was a constant presence in his films, which kept her in the public eye. But what looked like a professional blessing was, according to her, the first link in a chain of control. Locke claimed Eastwood insisted that she work almost exclusively with him and his company. In her own words, "If you were in Clint Eastwood movies, you were in the Clint Eastwood movie business. You weren't part of Hollywood." That world, which felt protective at first, soon became isolating. It cut her off from other directors and other opportunities. The industry stopped seeing her as Sondra Locke, the Oscar nominee, and started seeing her as just Clint Eastwood's girlfriend. That control bled from her career into the most private corners of her life. The unusual situation with her husband, Gordon, was something Eastwood seemed to tolerate, even enabling it by buying him a house. But this act of apparent generosity was also an act of possession. It brought everyone important in Locke's life under his financial control, making him the powerful center of her universe. She even called him Daddy, a nickname that speaks volumes about the power dynamic they had. She, in turn, was his Snow White, a princess in a castle he'd built for her, a castle whose walls were slowly closing in. Eastwood was famous for being a man of few words, and while that worked for his screen persona, it made for a difficult reality. Locke said that trying to have a serious conversation with him was like talking to a wall. His desires were often presented as final decisions, not points for discussion. This emotional distance was a huge crack in their relationship's foundation. He was used to being the director, and it seemed he saw their life together as just another movie he was in charge of. The illusion of a partnership really started to fray when Locke's own ambitions grew. She wanted to direct. She made her directorial debut in 1986 with Rat Boy, a quirky film produced by Eastwood's company. But when she tried to find projects on her own, outside of his shadow, she felt his support disappear. She noticed he became cranky and possessive, which she traced back to the moment she first stepped behind the camera. It was a sign that her independence felt like a threat to his control. She was supposed to be the muse, not a creator herself. During this time, Locke wrote that she suspected he was having affairs, a suspicion later confirmed when it was revealed he had fathered 2 children with flight attendant Jocelyn Reeves in the mid to late 1980s, a secret he kept from Locke for years. The man who had supposedly been made monogamous was leading a double life. The fairy tale wasn't just flawed, it was built on lies. The gilded cage, once a symbol of love and security, now felt like a prison. The key was firmly in his hand. The life she thought was hers was in fact his to give, and as she would soon find out, his to take away. The most devastating part of Clint Eastwood's alleged control, according to Sondra Locke, wasn't what it did to her career, but what it did to her future. The complete unraveling of their relationship was tied to her dream of motherhood. In the late 1970s, Locke, then in her mid-30s, became pregnant. For her, it was a joyous possibility. For Eastwood, she said, it was a problem. She claimed he was insistent that a baby didn't fit into their life. He already had children, and made it clear he didn't want more. Locke alleged that he pressured her into an abortion. Torn between her desire for a child and her desire to please the man who controlled every other part of her life, she agreed. A few years later, it happened again. She became pregnant a second time, and once more, she claimed, Eastwood convinced her to terminate the pregnancy. After the second abortion, Locke wrote that Eastwood suggested a permanent solution, a tubal ligation, a surgical sterilization procedure. She said he framed it as a way to end the stress and preserve their relationship. Trusting him, she agreed and had the surgery. ending her ability to ever have children. For his part, Eastwood has firmly denied ever pressuring her, stating that the decisions for the procedures were entirely Locke's. In fact, Locke herself later described the choice to have the procedures as a mutual decision. Still, in her memoir, she described the houses and gifts he gave her as a consolation prize for the family she was never able to have. This pattern of control seemed to mirror what was happening in her professional life. The most glaring example she gave was the film Sudden Impact. She had found the original script and developed it as a project for herself to direct. But Eastwood took the project over, had it rewritten, and turned it into the fourth Dirty Harry movie, starring and directed by himself. It became a huge box office hit, a success Locke felt was stolen from her. Whenever she brought other projects to Warner Brothers, Eastwood's home studio, the doors were always closed. Over 30 of her pitches were rejected. She started to feel like an outcast. The slow, painful realization. The end wasn't a quiet breakup. It was swift and brutal. On April 10, 1989, while Sondra Locke was away directing the film Impulse, Clint Eastwood made his move. There was no conversation and no goodbye. Instead, on Eastwood's orders, his staff changed the locks on the Bel Air home they shared. They packed up all of her belongings, her clothes, her books, her personal keepsakes, and put them in storage. When Locke returned home, she was met by security guards at the gate. Her key didn't work. Her home was no longer hers. Her life had been dismantled and thrown out while she was gone. It was a cold, calculated, and public humiliation. She later told a reporter, "He had every right, if he didn't love me, to end the relationship. But he didn't have the right to treat me that way." Eastwood's reason for the sudden eviction was, in his view, simple. He claimed he'd grown tired of her platonic marriage to Gordon Anderson and wanted a normal relationship. In legal depositions that followed, his lawyers tried to downplay their 13 years together, calling Locke his occasional roommate. For Locke, this was the ultimate insult, an attempt to erase their history. The lockout was final proof of the power imbalance that had ruled their lives. But the situation was even worse than she knew. Locke later alleged that just before the lockout, Eastwood had their home phone wiretapped, allowing him to listen to her conversations, including calls with her lawyer. It was a profound invasion of privacy and a tactic designed to give him the upper hand. Stripped of her home, Sondra Locke was left with only one thing: her story. And she was determined to make it heard. The bitter end of the romance was just the beginning of a very public war. After the lockout, Sondra Locke did something few people in Hollywood would dare to do. She fought back. In April 1989, she filed a palimony suit against Clint Eastwood, bringing the darkest allegations about their relationship into public view. The legal battle was brutal. In the middle of it all, in 1990, Locke was diagnosed with breast cancer. She underwent a double mastectomy and chemotherapy, all while fighting one of the most powerful men in the world. She said that Eastwood never once reached out after her diagnosis. Exhausted, Locke settled the suit in 1990. She received some money, a house, and, most importantly, a $1.5 million development and directing deal with Warner Brothers Eastwood's studio. This was supposed to be her comeback, a fresh start, but it was all a mirage. For 3 years, Locke pitched over 30 projects to the studio. Every single one was rejected. Her calls went unreturned. It was a silent, professional ghosting. Then, in 1995, the devastating truth came out. Locke discovered that her entire development deal was a sham. Eastwood had secretly reimbursed Warner Brothers for the entire $1.5 million contract. The studio, she alleged, had no intention of ever working with her. They were just paid by Eastwood to create a fake opportunity to get her to drop the first lawsuit. For Locke, this was the ultimate betrayal. He hadn't given her a lifeline. He had bought her silence and ensured she'd never work again. This led to a second, even more explosive, lawsuit in 1995, this time against both Eastwood and Warner Brothers for fraud. The case went to trial and became a landmark in contract law. Facing a jury trial they were likely to lose, both Warner Brothers and Eastwood settled with Locke out of court for undisclosed amounts. Though she won a legal and financial victory, her career was over. She struggled to find work, feeling ostracized by an industry that had closed ranks around its powerful male star. Her career, which started with an Oscar nomination, ended in isolation. Her 1997 memoir, The Good, the Bad, and the Very Ugly, was her final attempt to tell her truth in her own words. Sondra Locke passed away from cancer in 2018. Her story remains a powerful and tragic cautionary tale about the dark side of fame, leaving a permanent stain on the celebrated career of a Hollywood legend. The story of Sondra Locke and Clint Eastwood is a complicated and heartbreaking piece of Hollywood history. It brings up tough questions about power, consent, and legacy. What do you think? Was Sondra Locke a victim of a manipulative system, or was this just a messy love story with no clear villain? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. And if you found this story compelling, please hit the like button and subscribe for more deep dives into the secrets Hollywood tried to bury. In the end, the legacies of Sondra Locke and Clint Eastwood couldn't be more different. He remains one of the most revered filmmakers in history, his career largely untouched by the storm of allegations. He continued to win Oscars and earn praise, while her career was extinguished. For many, she became just a footnote in his story, a ghost in the Hollywood machine. Her memoir and lawsuits were a desperate fight to control her own narrative in a town that prefers powerful silence. She exposed a pattern of alleged emotional abuse and career sabotage from which she never truly recovered. While Eastwood denied the worst of the allegations, the legal settlements and the landmark fraud case point to a truth far more complex than a simple breakup with an occasional roommate. Sondra Locke's final confession forces us to look past the movie star personas and confront the uncomfortable realities that can hide just beneath the surface. It's a testament to the incredible courage it takes to stand up to power and the devastating cost that can come with it. She may have been written out of the official Hollywood script, but she penned a defiant final chapter that can't be erased.